Today is May 18th, 2020, and we have here with us on Houston Asian American Archive Oral History Collection. Our guest today is Stephen Wu. Thank you so much for your time and joining us during this difficult COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so to start, can you share with us where and when were you born?
I was born on July 9th, 1992 in State College, Pennsylvania. My parents, they immigrated from China in 1988 to State College to attend Penn State University, and I was born there 4 years later.
I see. How would you describe the neighborhood you grew up in?
Well, I only stayed there for a couple of years as like a small baby, so I don't really remember much. But from photos and what my parents have talked about is so we lived on campus. My dad was a graduate student trying to finish his PhD program, and we lived on campus with a bunch of other I guess aspiring graduates on campus. And I think there was a small knit like Chinese community there already. And my friends, my family, my mom and dad became friends with them, and there were a few instances of just me as a kid, like on my bicycle, a small tricycle, riding around with them, with like the people there and their children. So it was really quiet. It was really small. It was really intimate. That's what I got the most out of it.
Great. Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I have one little brother. He is in high school right now. He's exactly, well, not exactly, but he's 12 years younger than me. And he was born in New Orleans when we moved over there back in 2004.
I see. And what kind of family values have your parents instilled with you during your upbringing?
Well, that's a good question. Family upbringings. I think being someone who tries the best to help others, I think is probably one of the good values my family has instilled into me. Seeing if you are capable of or have the ability to, and if you obviously see folks in need, try to be there for them, whether it's doing something or just an act of kindness, just being there and listening and supporting them. I think that's something that I've carried from what they've taught me to this day. And it kind of helps me see the world to give any help that I can when I see it.
That's great. And did you learn to speak another language due to your family background?
So my parents did try to teach me Mandarin. And I did actually live briefly in China with my grandparents for about a year and a half when I was really small. And obviously over there I would only speak Mandarin. But ever since staying here in the States for the rest of my life, I haven't been as good at practicing Mandarin. So my speaking proficiency is conversational at best. And I've picked up a few other languages in terms of like high school teaching, and also like my spare time. Also like not that great, whether it's like Spanish or French. But yeah, Mandarin is probably like my second best, and that's not saying much.
So after Pennsylvania, you moved to New Orleans, right? How long were you there for?
We were there from 1998. So we moved when I was 6. My dad found a job at Tulane University as a professor in marketing, and we stayed there until 2005, so about 7 years. And I was going to school in New Orleans. This is kind of an interesting part, but when I grew up there, my parents wanted me to have obviously a good education, and we lived in the suburbs of New Orleans. And to them at that point, they believed that a Catholic school, or private schools would be the best. So as it was interesting as a non-religious family to go attend a Catholic school. So I had to learn a lot of these things that I had no idea what they were. Just trying to fit in essentially. And yeah, I was there doing that up until 2004, 2005. That's when Hurricane Katrina happens, and we had to evacuate actually to Houston temporarily. And ever since then, we moved away from New Orleans and to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So that's about like an hour northwest of New Orleans, and I stayed there for the next 4 years for high school.
I see. Wow, so that period sounded like a bit of culture shock inside the United States.
It was. I mean, I think like, so when Katrina hit, I was 13 years old. So I was still a kid. I was still trying to have fun, and still trying to figure out who I was. And I think growing up in New Orleans, in that part of New Orleans, in the suburbs, I didn't have as much contacts with like other Asian Americans or other people of color in general. Really, the Catholic school was majority white, and I didn't really understand what race meant because I was just surrounded by a bunch of other white people, and I'll say this: the only moments that I really understood race was when other kids would point it out to me that I was different. But I didn't really think about it that hard at that time because I was a kid and they weren't that terrible. But yes, Katrina, I think, really opened my eyes to see the rest of the world and how the world worked. Part of me still feels like the government could have done a lot more to help the people in New Orleans during the storm and after the storm. And, you know, our family was affected by that too, with our home flooding, and we had to evacuate to Houston. And also just seeing how people reacted to all these people coming into Houston at that time. There was a lot of mixed emotions. As a kid, you're feeling all of this from, like, you know, your family going through a lot, but also like your new school classmates viewing you like, you know, why are you here? And then just understanding that not everything is perfect anymore and that the real world is quite difficult, was definitely an eye-opening experience to me.
Wow. So how does that experience compare to the current pandemic?
That's a good question. I think on a personal level, there's similarities with anxiety. So there's anxiety during the storm when the storm goes through, you know, your city and you don't know what's happening. And then of course the after effects, let's say if you were flooded or you had damage to your homes, there's just this stress of trying to fix things. And I think for this pandemic, obviously it's different because I get to stay home, luckily, and I'm not as affected as other people who are essential workers, but there's still this feeling of anxiety of not knowing when things will get back to a state where it's comfortable. And it's been over 3 months, almost 3 months now for this pandemic. And for the hurricane, for Katrina, and also any other hurricanes that people have gone through, that lasts quite a while in terms of the mental fatigue. There is a sense of trauma that you do feel afterwards. And I think for this pandemic, it's also going to be similar, where even after the pandemic is done, the lasting effects, whether it's like financial or mental, it's going to go for quite some time. So I find that very similar in terms of like anxiety. Also, and this is the part where Katrina was very eye-opening. So that I remember as a kid watching on TV as the waters were coming through and people were trying to survive, the media would say, you know, whenever there was like a white family who was trying to find like things to eat in stores, they would just describe them as survivors. But if it was, let's say, a Black family, they would call them looters. And I think that racial divide is was illuminated because of the storm, and I think this pandemic is also doing the same thing in terms of characterizing people terribly because of just how they look. Um, and yeah, I find that as another similarity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, before we cover that, would you mind sharing some of your stories during college? You were studying at Georgia Tech, right? Georgia
Yeah,
Tech.
I went to Georgia Tech, and that's in Atlanta. So um, I went there to study chemical engineering, uh, and I think that was my real first exposure to just a bunch of other different people. Again, growing up in Louisiana, I didn't see as many other faces. Um, so Atlanta and Georgia Tech was a good experience for that. That's also where I got exposed to more social justice work. My real first exposure to what specifically Asian American advocacy means. So before, I grew up in a very privileged life. My parents had enough to support me. I mean, we didn't have a lot, but we had enough to survive. And I never felt personally that the stress from that point. But when I went to college and I met other people, and they started to teach, no, I'm not teach, but yeah, explain more about what our history has been and what our current people go through, especially those who are not as wealthy, who may not have citizenship, uh, those who have more unfortunate um, situations. That really opened my eyes to see how like our population, if we want to call it Asian America, we go through so many things that other groups go through as well, and that there is so much more work that we need to do to make sure that all of us in this community are supported and given a fair opportunity and shake to really succeed.
Yeah. And what kind of extracurricular activities have you engaged in back in college?
So the first organization I started out with was China Care Club. It is, I think, yeah, it's a nonprofit organization that helps orphans in China get medical attention if they need it. And we as a club on campus would raise money through our different events. Like we had this carnival event, which would bring in students and families to play games, and then the money that we made over there would be donated to helping one orphan that we sponsored to receive medical treatment. And so that was the primary goal. One of the other major goals that we had is any Chinese orphans who were adopted in the Atlanta area, we would hold monthly like play groups just so that they would still be connected with their cultural heritage. And it was nice to see that the families who adopted these orphans still kept in mind that their cultural heritage was really important. And they would bring them every month. It was very consistent. So it was really nice to see how like the club on campus was providing a good service to the families in the area. And so from there, I think I met a few other folks on campus who were involved with the Asian American Student Association, or ASA. And I think it was really just having a few conversations and this, hey, why don't you join our organization? I was like, okay, yeah, sure, why not? Again, at that point, I still didn't really know about Asian American advocacy. So with that organization, I was the education chair. We were trying, the keyword is trying, we were trying to start a Asian American Studies program on campus because Georgia Tech never had one. And I think I still remember, like, as the first ever education chair, my job was to figure out how to start doing that. And I had no idea what I was doing. But it was a good experience overall, again, for me, just to learn first of all, what our history was, and second of all, what it took to at least get, let's say, faculty and staff to buy into why we need an Asian American Studies program, talking to other professors from other universities who already have it. That was nice as well. So it was a wild experience, but a good one overall. And yeah, so those are the two main clubs or organizations that I helped out with on campus.
Great. Yeah, that sounds really encouraging to see that as a young person, you were already really aware to, yeah, back then. How about your major? Can you talk about how you decided on your major back then?
Yeah, so I chose chemical engineering primarily because as a middle school and high school student, I found like chemistry of all the sciences to be the most interesting.
Mhm.
Um, and I felt chemical engineering had the most, uh, I guess, it was the most flexible degree to find, I guess, employment. And with the help of my parents and also friends and teachers, I think chemical engineering was the choice that I made for those reasons. It was not easy to complete that degree at Georgia Tech at all. I still have really bad nightmares of what we went through, but I think it helped prepare me from a um, like problem solving and just logical approach, understanding of like issues to help me with my day job, but also with everything else that I'm doing too. I think it just helps me understand like, there's a certain pathway you might need to go to get to finish your project or whatever, versus just going all over the place. So I think that was a good learning experience for me. Uh, that being said, so I had that degree. Um, uh, I'm actually in the middle of potentially changing my career paths, actually.
Oh, wow. So, and after you graduated, did you immediately start working at Chevron?
Yeah. So I guess backing up a little bit, I did internships while I was at Georgia Tech. The
Mhm.
first one with DuPont
Mhm.
in Mobile, Alabama. And then my next internship was with Chevron here in Houston for the summer. And then I think after that, when I was applying to be a full-time employee, Chevron brought me uh, back in Houston, and I graduated in the fall of 2013, and then I started at Chevron full-time in the spring of 2014. So it was like right after.
Mhm. And how do you balance your full-time job with your other jobs, like nonprofit? Like, how does the time work for you?
Uh, I think the best answer that I have is just carving out time.
Mhm.
Um, you there's only obviously only 24 hours in a day, and you have to figure out, number one, what is your priority at that moment in time. Um, and unfortunately for me, everything is priority, so I just end up spending a lot more time with everything.
Yeah.
And but it's carving out time really to say like, okay, there's an hour, what can I do in that hour to do these other things?
Mhm.
And I was like, especially when I first moved to Houston, when I joined different organizations and really got my hands dirty with these projects,
Mhm.
um, it would be just like literally thinking, okay, I only have 4 more hours before I need to go to sleep. What can I do in those 4 hours to work on the film festival that I was leading, or this other program that I'm thinking about, and then also mentally preparing for the next day at work.
Mhm. So talking about your change of work earlier, if you're comfortable talking, like
Yeah.
what direction and why were you thinking about it?
Yeah, so I am definitely wanting to change into more of a policy uh, position or role uh, that deal with social justice. I think the main focuses that I really would love to work on is immigration, criminal justice, um, and I think for me the reason why is when I got exposed in college to Asian American advocacy, that led me to say, hey, I have a full-time job in Houston now. That doesn't mean I have to stop doing what I've just discovered and have found more or less a love for. And through a friend that I already had in Houston, I got connected with OCA Greater Houston, which is a nonprofit that serves the Asian American community here in Houston. And through them, again, more exposure and having more opportunities to lead on different projects that serve the people here. I think my brain and my heart soon realized that my passions for this outweighed my passions for chemical engineering or engineering overall. And I think it was maybe like a year or a year and a half ago where I said, I think I need to switch, because my expression is I'd rather wake up in the middle of the night working on advocacy than engineering at this point. And that was telling. I was like, okay, I think I need to make a switch now.
I see. So what was the most defining moment in your nonprofit advocacy work?
Ooh, most defining moment. These are really good questions. I think there were a couple, if I can mention more than one. So the first one was when I was leading the Houston Asian American Pacific Islander Film Fest, or Happy Fest, as we call it, which is a program of OCA Greater Houston. It was my second year, I think, as festival co-director, and we already did the majority of the festival. We had most of our films already screened to the public, and it was already great. But it was the last night, and we had our Arts Night program where different artists singers, dancers, comedians, etc. would be on stage, and they would present their talents to everybody to close out the festival. And the last performer, I invited basically everyone to just come to the front to dance with him. And there was one person who was a little bit more senior, and she was just having she was having the time of her life. And I think for me, up until that point, I hadn't really enjoyed the festival and understanding what it meant. But to see her, someone who's a little bit older, still dancing, having so much fun in the middle of a crowd that's majority younger people, I was like, okay, this is why this festival is important. This is why I love doing this, to see that all quote unquote social barriers just being knocked down and you just enjoying yourself regardless. I think that was really beautiful for me. So that was one of the defining moments that I have for the festival. I think another defining moment was probably not last year. It was last year. It was the beginning of 2019. At that point, there was a lot of ICE raids, immigration raids going on in the country, and especially in the Southeast Asian community. And Houston obviously has a sizable Southeast Asian community, and a lot of those people were being affected as well, but not as much attention given to that. And other cities were holding rallies and to demonstrate to stop these raids, to stop these family separations. And I got involved to try and help host a rally in Houston, which we did. But before that, I think meeting some of the people who were incarcerated themselves, they're free, well, not free, but they're not in incarceration right now. And hearing their stories of why, because of, again, bad circumstances, their families had to come to the US because of the war in Southeast Asia. And then they were put into really bad situations here in the US, which led them to make decisions that cost them their freedom to go into either jail or prison. And then after that, because they're not US citizens, they were transferred over to ICE. And to see the ripple effects of how one decision affected their whole life and their families and their loved ones, and hearing those stories, I think also had a huge, profound effect on me in understanding essentially how our systems in place today, especially when it deals with immigration or criminal justice, is really, really not fair. And I think we hear a lot about it, we read a lot about it, but when you get to sit down and have a conversation with somebody, it puts it into a whole different perspective. Because I think a lot of us, we all make mistakes, and some of us are more fortunate than others to either get away with it or have resources to, you know, put that case away or whatnot. But most people don't. And to hear again more personal stories was that also helped me make this decision of like, you know, I have invested more energy towards that than like other things that I should be doing. That's another reason why I want to make this career change. So that was definitely another defining moment for me.
Mm-hmm. So in the Happy Film Festival, what kind of progress has been made during your tenure as a co-director in like advancing the equality of the Asian Americans?
Yeah, so I think when I joined the film festival, we were still a relatively small film festival in Houston, still trying to grow, and it was more, you know, focused on. I mean, it's still focused on presenting works of art from our own people for our own people. But I think the one thing that I wanted to do was make the festival a little bit more professional in a sense. And I'm not even sure if that's the right word, but essentially, I wanted to be a place where artists can use this festival as a way of increasing of bettering their own careers, you know, versus just a place to, you know, show a film for the community. I think I also want to make sure that artists, filmmakers, and actors and actresses, when they submit their work, they could use this as a way of, you know, moving their careers forward. So we essentially kind of implemented a little bit more structure with different positions to make it more concrete, whether it's like operations or programming or marketing, just to make sure things are more clear. We also increased the number of films that we were going to show, different categories. I think before we had a lot more documentaries, but I really wanted to showcase more narrative films, you know, more fictional, but these are stories of our own people, still real and valid nonetheless. We had, for the first time, judging. So before, we never had any like awards for the films, but now we want to say, okay, we have like audience members and judges to give like their critique of the films, and then they would get awards at the end of the festival. Again, that way, whoever wins can kind of just like showcase like, hey, I won this at the Houston Asian American Pacific Islander Film Festival. That means something. So I think that was another great thing, just to show more vote of confidence to artists that like, we want to help build your careers too. And I think by doing that, more people were submitting to our festivals. And because of that, we had to like partner up with a lot more organizations. And this is the part that's, I think, the other cool part, where we are the Houston Asian Pacific Islander Film Festival, but there's also a lot of other great organizations in Houston that care about these things, that may not use like film and art as a way to communicate their work, but this way they can. So like, if we have a film about, let's say like Filipino food, right? Then we can potentially partner up with one of the Filipino organizations in Houston to work with us. So it was a way of connecting more of Houston together through, again, the medium of art, which I thought was spectacular, because at the end of the day, we wanted to build this space where people would feel comfortable being like Asian American and just seeing ourselves on the screen. And yeah, just the the expression that we were using at that time was like the taste, the sounds, and sights of Asian America. And so all this like fully comprehensive and comprehensive uh, experience for Asian Americans was great. Um, yeah, those were like some of the things that we did.
Oh,
And
that's amazing.
our attendance grew because of that. So that was nice.
So who were the attendances? Like most of them were Asians, or you got some?
Uh, yeah, I think at the end of the day, it was still majority Asian Americans, which is fine. I think again, we wanted a space where we wanted ourselves to see ourselves. Before, actually, it was quite hard to get even our own people to attend the festival because either they didn't really care that much, or I don't know what else. Because like our festival was free, so there was no cost to even go into it. It was free to the public. But we did a good we tried to do more outreach to our own people of like, hey, you know, these are our stories that I'm sure either you or your parents or your children can relate to. You just have a good experience watching. So it was more Asian American in the audience.
Great. And speaking about film, like I trust you've also followed and tuned in the PBS documentary Asian Americans premiere earlier. I mean, actually last week. Can you share with some of your thoughts after watching that?
So yeah, I watched it. I watched all 5 hours, and it was a really good, I think, take on our history because we've never had any other film that documented our past to the public. I think the obviously the Chinese Railroad experience that they mentioned was really enlightening. We've read it in books, we've seen it like mentioned, but to see like personal stories of how like families and people were surviving back then was really nice. They went down obviously like the whole path of um, uh, the immigration waves, how policy affected immigration waves, and you know cut families ties, um, and 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 then kind of relating to like what's happening now. So it was a good bridge to see how our past was connecting to our present, which I really appreciated. I'm glad that they also shared a lot of stories of the different experiences of Asian Americans, whether it's like Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, South Asian Americans, Vietnamese Americans, um, Filipino Americans, et cetera, et cetera. So it was trying to show that you know our history is more than just Chinese Americans. Obviously, there's so many other people who are who have made so much contributions and who have you know gone through so much in this country as well. Uh, the the things that I think, and I don't you know blame or I don't fault the film because it was only 5 hours and there's so much to talk about. You literally have to go to an Asian American Studies class program to understand more, which speaks to what we need to change. But I think if the film has an opportunity to add more in the future, it would be nice to spend more time on those other communities because I believe the majority of the film was still Chinese American heavy, which is um, which I know there's a lot in our history, but there's also a lot in other people's histories too that gets overlooked. And I wish more time would be spent on that as well. And so just to again showcase that how varied Asian America is. It's not just one group of people, it's so many other groups of people. And they all go through so many different issues as well. So yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is just making sure that other groups have the opportunity to be presented in the same light as the majority.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And also, in addition to this documentary, in the pop culture, the Hollywood films, we've been seeing the rise of Asian American representations, like the Crazy Rich Asians and the Farewell. And also this year we got the Oscar winning The Parasite, which is
Yes.
also a foreign language Korean movie. So what do you see like the changes of the representation of Asian Americans in our country?
So yeah, the change in Hollywood and in mainstream media has been great. It's nice to see more people who look like us on screen, and also at the same time, I think telling stories that we relate to. So I mean, I think Crazy Rich Asians was a good film, but I didn't connect to it as much as I connected to The Farewell, because The Farewell was a story about a Chinese American in New York who has family back in China, and one of their the grandma was going through her illness, and that's something that I related to because it's similar to what I've experienced personally, and I think I found that to be uh, something that I knew like it's a real story, but I never imagined that that kind of story would make it on the big screen, like ever. I was like, wow, that's so relatable. Like to hear them speak like Mandarin and also English, and also her struggling to speak both languages. I was like, oh wow, that's very much me. And also being conflicted of being both Chinese and American at the same time. Like, what does that even mean? So I found that to be nice, that more stories that fit what we as Asian Americans want to see versus what Hollywood wants to see. I think that is very powerful, and I found that to be the most illuminating. Um, but the critique though is again similar to the PBS film. I think the majority of content is still dominated by certain groups of people, and again, there are so many different experiences. I want to see those experiences also on the screen as well, just like, again, so that they have their share of time, because their stories are so rich as well, and I want to make sure that like all people have that opportunity of like going to the movie theaters with their popcorn with their families, and literally just crying together because they found the film to be so relatable, versus in the past they couldn't have made that connection. So that's what I'm looking forward to, hoping to change. Because I know when I watched The Farewell, I watched it in theaters, and I watched it with friends, and I watched it with other people. But then when I went home to my family, I made my family watch it with me, just so that they could like see this with me as well. And I think they enjoyed it. They had some criticisms as well, which makes sense. But overall, I think they liked seeing that our people were on the screen, which was nice.
Yeah, so sounds like you watch it 4 times. And what were the reactions of the different group of people you watched with? Like, how were your family's reaction?
So I watched it with my um, cousin's husband
Uh-huh.
and my cousin's my aunt
Uh-huh.
once, uh, and then I watched it with my own like mom, dad, and brother the second time. So when I watched it with my aunt and my cousin's husband, they they actually I was worried because they don't they're not they're from China, and I didn't know if they could relate to what the main character's experience was, but they did. So my cousin's husband also had an experience where he was here in the U.S. because he was studying here, but he couldn't go back to one of his grandparents. I think to go see his grandparents when they were having some kind of illness or something similar to that, and so that was still relatable to him. And um, to my aunt, the film really showed the differences between the two countries, which she has a lot of thought about. And so that way, like we had a good conversation about the film because of that. So that was very surprising that they connected with the film as much as they did. I didn't know if they would. To my parents, they they liked the film, uh, but they also felt that, and this is the part where it's a little challenging because we don't have as much content out there. They felt that this story was from a very specific perspective, which it was. It was from Lulu's perspective. But my parents were saying, look, like our family wouldn't do that. We would not lie about our illnesses to our family members. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess it's not universal.
Right.
But so that was a good conversation, and I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know. Like, I don't know. Like, why are we more honest than other people? Who knows? But it really shows. It really showed me that even like to my parents, they want content that reflects more of our people accurately, and I think that's a good comment on how we just need more stories about our people, because one person can only share one perspective, and Lulu is only one director. We need other people too to share other experiences that relate with us. So I was like, oh wow, my parents have really good film critique. This is nice. It was a good conversation to have. So it was good. It was good.
Seems like a good conversation in your family. Like you also are in the film kind of advocacy industry. Um, can you talk about Together Empowering All, that initiative you founded inside the OCA Greater Houston?
Yeah, so T Talks, as we call it, Together Empowering All, was an idea that we had in 2015, I believe. We wanted, so at that time, I was starting with the film festival. I was doing that for a few months, and I realized that while it's good to have a space to see our own faces and our content on the screen, I think it also would be nice to have a space for us to talk about these things,
Right.
to give attention to like conversations, because at that time, I didn't know many places in Houston that just had these little forums where people could just talk about their feelings, which I think is very important. And especially as Asian Americans, I don't think we spend as much time talking about how we feel about things. And so anyways, yeah, I with two other members from the OCA board said, let's create this little series of roundtable discussions on different topics every month, and just generate conversation from our own people, and we'll see where it goes. And then from there, I think we started with more of a history of Asian America as our first topic, and the model minority myth, and education opportunities within the Asian American community. So it was all very specific to the Asian American community, which was great. But then I think after a year of doing that and building our audience members, we wanted to expand to have topics that tied in other communities. Because, well, number one, if our name is Together Empowering All, we should be including other people, and also tying in their experiences with our experiences. So yeah, we began to talk about, I think the first one was related to the LGBTQIA community, how that is obviously a huge issue within the Asian American community that still has problems with, especially from like the older generation, of recognizing those people, especially if they're their children. So we wanted to provide a space where family members, like parents, would talk about how they dealt with like their children coming out. It was really emotional, as you can imagine. So that was the great, I think, to me, again, these are like these very uncomfortable conversations that I wanted to have that other folks might not have had the opportunity to do. So that was a really good one. We did one with like Muslim Americans. Obviously, like a large percentage of Asian Americans are Muslim, and we wanted to have a conversation about how like their community was doing during that time. We had one with immigration in DACA, how like a lot of Asian Americans are undocumented. The narrative, obviously, in America is that it's more like a Latinx problem, but Asian Americans also fall in that umbrella. So again, providing more of a space for us to talk about those issues. So I think, yeah, after the year focused more on Asian Americans, and then when we expanded to talk about issues that affected other people, we we definitely hit a lot more heavy topics, and it got more intense. But I think that was good, because again, we don't share these thoughts that often and in public, and even if we do, I don't know if we're speaking as honestly as we want to. So
Mhm.
we just wanted to provide a space for us to have these conversations. And then at the end, I think this is the best part of Tea Talks. We have like this little packet of what the topic is, but also resources and ways of taking action. So if you found the DACA conversation to be good, then there are ways for you to volunteer for different organizations. There are ways for you to donate money to different organizations, and there's things for you to do individually to make this issue hopefully go away. And I think to me that was the goal. It's like we talk about the issues, but also now there are actual tangible ways for you to get involved versus just going back home and thinking about it. But now you have like a resource for you to say like, oh, you know, I can spend money or donate money to help somebody's cause. I can call my representative for them to do something. Um, so it was providing, yeah, those resources to people to take action. So that was great.
Yeah, that was wonderful. So you also collect the civic engagement efforts to turn out more Asian American votes. Can you speak about that?
Yeah. So I, so this it's actually kind of interesting how this is all like going one program by another, because it also shows like how my passions was evolving. So it started with the film fest, and then it became Tea Talks, and then I think 2018 was approaching, and knowing that the election was going to be really important, especially to turn out Asian American voters, I got more involved with that side with OCA, and it was figuring out, okay, you know, where do our populations live in Houston, how what has been their historic turnout, which is not good, and but also with that information, how do we how do we find different ways of getting them to, you know, go to the ballots essentially, you know, whether it's doing phone banking in language, whether it's canvassing with people who can speak in language, you know, printing material in language as well. It's so, yeah, finding different ways of communicating that voting is important to our populations was very illuminating to me. I I knew we like never had a high turnout, but I never knew exactly why. To me, it was like, yeah, why don't we vote as much? I don't really understand. But I think talking to the people who worked on this, and also my family too, it helped me understand why. And then with that, you could kind of figure out what to do with it. So for my family, I think um, they grew up in China post communist takeover, and they didn't really have an opportunity to vote. That was not really a thing, and the whole like political system was not what they wanted to put it like that. And so when they came here, they never put as much emphasis with political systems because their experience with political systems have been not the best. So when they come here, it's like, well, let's focus on ourselves. Let's focus on what we can control and not focus on everything else. So like hearing their stories, hearing other people's stories of why like their families don't vote, that helped me figure out, okay, this way I know now how to better communicate with somebody versus just saying vote, 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 vote and expecting them to vote. But now I'll have a conversation of like, you know, why don't you vote? Let's talk about why, you know, it's different here, and how your vote can affect so many different things, whether it's like education, healthcare, your job, uh, and the things that you care about, right? And that to me was a very it was a growing experience for me to understand how to better communicate why voting is important to people.
Yeah. Yeah, and earlier this year, it's also, although not successful, encouraging to see Andrew Yang making as far as he could in that campaign.
Yeah, that was surprising. I did not know he would go that far.
Mm.
I was like, wow, he's really gaining like a lot of support for this. It was interesting because my parents would keep texting me about Andrew Yang. I'm like, wow, this guy is really going the distance, and he's like getting more popular. And I was like, yeah, I'm surprised too.
And you also led another, like so many, one of them, very, very many on your resume, the Texas Data Quality Coalition. Can you describe your involvement?
Yeah, so that one was, I think, my last project with OCA formally.
Mm-hmm.
So a little background. I think I was in Chicago or another city for a conference,
Mm-hmm.
and this was in 2018. Um, we 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 were noticing that Massachusetts was recently having this pretty lively battle to expand demographic categories for all their state agencies.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, it was very high level. I think it was like white, black, Asian, Hispanic. That's about it. But they wanted to add the categories below that. So, for example, for Asian, they wanted to add like Chinese, Vietnamese, Indian, Pakistani, Filipino, et cetera, et cetera, so that whenever they collected data, they would have a more disaggregated viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that was happening in Massachusetts, and it got me thinking, why can't we start something like that in Texas? Because we also do a very, very poor job of collecting information of our people. And that led me to just have conversations with people like from Massachusetts or California or Washington State that have done this before and succeeded, about why it's important to have more clear and like granular data of our people. Because the one thing that I learned is when you put us all together under one little box, our people's experiences get erased essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have one population that's so much larger versus others, then that number or that information gets averaged out almost essentially. And to me, that kind of spoke, because I guess this is speaking more to like my engineering background. We have a saying of like, garbage in, garbage out. If you feed a system bad information, you're only going to get bad results. And to me, this was, one was very immoral, but also illogical for government institutions to not have the best data possible to best serve our people. And the one area that we found the most alarming, I think, was health, public health, literally life or death, depending on the situation. And if we don't have the information of our people to show that, let's say, certain populations like Chinese Americans or Vietnamese Americans have higher rates of stomach cancer, because when you put us all together, that number is not as high anymore, then you're not going to provide resources to address that. And those resources could be more public health facilities, like the one we have here in Houston, Hope Clinic. They specialize in the Asian American community, and they have people who can speak in language. Well, if we have more data that shows that, again, these people are being affected more, then you could have more facilities that could speak that language. You could have material translated in language. You can have more targeted approach of communicating this issue to people who may not even know. So that was something that really spurred me to say, okay, this is an issue in Texas. Given also that we have like the lowest rates of insurance, that our Medicare expansion did not go through. So all this together what is something that we can do to help make it a little better? And I thought, okay, let's try to increase the demographic options that we can pick, that we analyze, and that we report. So yeah, that became like a 1.5 year sprint of just figuring out what policy meant and how to like execute policy, like from gaining like partner support to writing like a small little paper to tell state legislatures of like why this is important, to figuring out like how much money this would cost to actually execute, to doing not town halls, but like little education forums to the people of like why this is important and why you should support it. And then yeah, it just became like a whole huge project.
Yeah, so could you share some of your thoughts on how to get more like younger Asian Americans like yourself to step up and get more involved in community activities?
Ooh, how to get more involved? Well, I think for younger people today, they have a really good. They're already really connected with, of course, the internet versus like when we were younger. So I think they know how to find things much better. Um, so 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 that that's a barrier that's not there anymore. I think they also care about so because they're more exposed to more information. I think they also understand the issues a lot better. So they, at a younger age, I've met a lot of young people in high school who care so much about like social advocacy, way more than I did when I was in high school. Like I only cared about like how to become more of an adult, I guess, and they're caring about like fixing the world, which is amazing. Um, I think that passion led them to actually find us, like organizations in Houston, to help with their projects. So to me, that showed that if organizations put out information online or wherever, those young people who want to make change will reach out to you, or they will make their own change themselves, which I think is also an amazing thing. I think the one thing I would tell any young person who is thinking about this right now is to just not be afraid, because at this point in time, I think this world is showing that like adults sometimes really don't know what they're doing, or most of the time don't know what they're really doing, and and their ideas are very like archaic, and it doesn't really fix anything. But the ideas from the young people are really, I think, transformative a lot of times in very creative ways. So yeah, I mean, if you have those ideas, and if you want to dive into it, I said, don't be afraid. Find organizations who believe in you to support you, because we're here, and I think for the most part we want to help support your ideas. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah. So following on when we were speaking of public health and public policy, like we would like to get some of your responses to our current pandemic, and just to learn more about your lives and your perspectives on this crisis. And can you share with us some of the change in our life, like working from home and being isolated from the rest of the world, I guess? How does that change your mindset and your perspectives?
Well, I think so. For obviously personally, the ever constant anxiety of the pandemic has been in my mind for the past 3 months. So that's not going away, I don't think, anytime soon. But I think for me, from a more like large picture, I think it really has shown me that our systems are not created they were not created to really handle this. And I'm glad we talked about Katrina and how it connects here, because when I was 13, I also realized that the systems in place were not designed to handle that kind of issue. And I began to really like question a lot of those systems of like, were they designed poorly, or were they designed poorly intentionally because they don't want us to use it as much? And I think it's very similar to the pandemic. When you hear stories of people who are losing their jobs, especially let's say here in Texas, and that our unemployment system and like website are so old that it takes forever to even like keep up, which I think is inexcusable, especially now. And then it gets you thinking, like, why has that always been so bad? And is it bad on purpose to discourage things? And I'm not sure. But those are the things that are coming into my head. How like our essential workers are now the most important people helping us stay alive, essentially, like people who are at grocery stores, the first responders, people, medical professionals. These are the people who are keeping our world kind of intact. But yet a lot of them are also the ones who are paid the least, have the least benefits, and are risking their lives to make sure that we're still alive. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's an overall just question of like, all these systems are still, these systems are not doing what we need them to do, and how can we figure out a way to make them better to serve all of our people in a just way? And I think that's the part where we need to think. It's hard because we're still living in the pandemic, but those are the things that we need to think about now as well. That's the reform part after the recovery. And I think similar again to like, let's say the hurricane examples, a lot of people were only focused upon recovery, but there needs to be reform too, whether it's strengthening our levees or making sure that homes aren't built in low, in flood areas, right? And making our houses stronger. And also, not having like development people just going into these areas and then building new homes and pushing people out, essentially. Those are things that we needed to do for reform for hurricanes. And similarly for this pandemic, we need to think about how to change those systems, because I mean, I'm not saying that it would happen again, but it could happen again, and we need to be better prepared for when it does happen again, or for if it does happen again.
Yeah, definitely a lot of the bigger picture policy things that needs upgrading. And how about technology? Like we are all seeing everything being moved online, like we are doing now, and Zoom and FaceTime, and we kind of focus our perspectives and get all our sources of information from a screen or a gadget. What do you see that will do to our future?
It's going to hurt our eyes and our eyesight, that's for sure. I don't know about you, but I've been getting a lot of like eye fatigue because you're just always on the screen. But okay, so besides that, I think it's good. Overall, I think one example, like telemedicine, a lot of people are now, they don't have to go to like the hospital to get checkups. They could just use a screen to get their diagnoses. I think that's awesome. It saves so much time and energy for me, and for a lot of other people who are working in like corporate America. They're realizing that they don't actually have to go into the office every day. Like you could still get a lot of work done at home or at a coffee shop, and that saves money and time and energy, which is great. So I think it will make it a little bit more efficient with the way we work. However, I still don't think it's a replacement to actually like interact with people. I think there's still something to be said about having in-person meetings or in-person just talking. Like there's some things that you just can't communicate over like the internet. In my opinion, I don't think you can, as you can in person. There's just that human connection, if you will, that is missing. So yeah, I think overall, this is going to be very transformative with, like I mentioned, medicine, education as well, business and our jobs. But I really hope that we still balance that with like some human interactions.
Yeah. So what do you miss most in this pandemic during like our quarantine?
Oh my God, I miss going out and eating with friends. I miss hugging people. Like I haven't hugged a person in forever. I'm living here in Houston by myself right now. My family is in Louisiana, so I haven't seen them or touched them for so long. So I keep telling friends that once this is over, I'm going to hug all my friends really hard and really tightly and not let go, because it's something that I took for granted. I think we all took for granted for so long. But yeah, I think it's going to be amazing when we, let's say, go out to eat dinner with friends and just sitting there for the first time ever, like not worried about anything except what to eat and what to order. It's going to be really nice. But yeah, that's what I'm going to look forward to the most.
Yeah, we're also seeing so many creative video clips or performances on, I don't know if you do Facebook and social media, just a lot of very heartwarming messages from the artist community. Have you seen many of those from your friends from Happy?
I don't think I've seen that from them specifically. Those folks right now are still very focused on having a film festival this year. So they're actually going online. Like a lot of other events, they're moving online. For a film festival, that's a little easier because you have a computer at home, you can watch movies there. So it kind of works out. But in terms of what you asked, like heartwarming videos, I'm trying to remember if I saw something that was really adorable or cute. I think. Oh yeah, no, I do remember one. I think there was this family who was celebrating their child's birthday, and their friends and their children decided to go in their cars and drive around the neighborhood in front of their house to celebrate by honking and waving and throwing presents out the window. And I was like, wow, like that's so creative. There's still a way to, in person, celebrate somebody's life while still being safe. And I found that to be so awesome, that the kid can still have a good birthday, even during like these really terrible times. That gives a lot of hope. It gives a lot of hope.
Right. And have you personally engaged in any of the responses to the outbreak?
I think the most I've done so far is donating a little bit of money here and there to support getting masks and gloves and supplies. Also to food banks that are supporting families who, let's say, their children were depending on schools for food, or they themselves have lost their jobs and they now need to find food themselves. Yeah, I think those are the main things that I have been doing myself. It is challenging because as much as I want to obviously help in person, volunteer at things, I also worry that I might be exposing other people to the virus, which is a challenge. It's such a complicated thing to think about, because at the same time you want to help, but the other point, like, you might be hurting them just by being there. And that's, I know like there's precautions you can take, but it's something that I still think about. Um, and so I'm trying to do as much as I can that doesn't involve like me physically interacting with another person. So if it's promoting something like on my social media of like a cause or donating myself, I think those are the least that I can do during this time.
That's great to hear. So moving on the slightly more realistic side of the story, and as we are in the pandemic, we are also seeing some, like xenophobia and targeted, as you also mentioned briefly earlier. So what do you see are the parallels in history that happen to Asian Americans today, for example?
Yeah, so the anti-Asian hate crimes have definitely spiked because of this virus. Whether it's from our own leaders, public officials who call it a certain name, which I'm not going to call it that because it's terrible, or even just people in general who have these feelings that are just bubbling up, and they're pointing that anger at our community. Um, the parallels I think are extremely similar to what we've gone through in the past. I think when like Asian Americans first came to this country, to California, for the railroad workers, especially from China, a lot of people in California called it, like the yellow peril. They wanted to kick us out because we were taking jobs, because we were doing things that they didn't think we should be doing in this country. So they like enacted laws to prevent us from coming in. The Chinese Exclusion Act, for example, in 1882, I believe. And then that led to even further like immigration restrictions in the 1900s, all out of fear that we would be doing something bad to this country. And there were instances where they thought like our people would bring disease, or not be able to assimilate to this country and bring bad practices or culture, this othering factor, if you will. And so it's coming back now to what we're going through. It's a really easy thing, I think, for people to just blame a person for the issues without really thinking about why this thing is the problem in the first place. I don't think they're thinking that no one in China, no one in Hubei or Wuhan wanted this disease either. No one wanted this. It happened, it was bad, and it got worse because of actions governments took. But to blame people who look potentially like that would be is just terrible. So for me personally, like my mom is actually from Wuhan, and so we have family members from the city. So when this first started back in January, and then it got really bad there, I was hearing this, and so did like a few of my other colleagues or friends or whatnot who have family members in China. But in the U.S., no one really paid attention to it because it didn't come here yet. So when people were calling it like, the virus from that city name, I knew that was the start of something really bad, because once you associate a virus or like a bad thing with a place or a region or a people, then some people are going to naturally just make that bad connection. And they did. Which is why I think the rules have changed now with the WHO, that you can't name a virus based upon a location, because they know how that can lead to stereotyping, hate crime, and discrimination. But some people did it anyway, and it led to what we've seen so far. I'm sure you've seen like the reports of the family in Midland, Texas, where they got slashed in the face. The woman who was taking her trash out in New York City getting acid spilled on her. Um, one of the more heartbreaking ones that I saw was this little girl, I think California, and she wrote a letter, like a handwritten letter, and it was a letter to her friend saying, "Hey, we were just online, and you were making fun of the virus and saying that like I was the reason why it happened." Um, that makes me sad, and that makes me sad because you would think that your friend is causing like this pain, and to me, to see how like children are like going through this as well, like young people who should not be worrying about something like this, having to worry about this, is really heartbreaking. Um, that being said, I think a lot of organizations are doing a lot to try and prevent this, or to try and slow slow this spread of racism, essentially. Um, whether it's like uh, they're holding bystander training, uh, where if you see somebody spewing hate and discrimination against somebody in the public, there are ways for you to intervene and stop that and support the person who's being attacked. Whether it's also like supporting, obviously businesses who have been discriminated, even before the virus came here, to give money to them. Obviously helping our frontline workers, who a lot of them, especially in the medical field, are Asian American, and they're facing a double jeopardy. One is the virus itself when they're treating people, but then it's when some patients actually don't want them to treat them because they're Asian, even though they're trying to save their life. So it's like a double-edged sword, double jeopardy. They're finding ways to support them as well. And also I think the other big thing is coming together with other communities, especially those who are marginalized themselves, knowing that this is just one example of how hate crimes have come to this country, or come up through this country, and it's only going to repeat itself moving forward. Like we've seen examples where, let's say, like post 9/11, obviously, like a lot of Muslim Americans and South Asian Americans and Middle Eastern Americans were profiled because of that. The past few years with immigration from the border, a lot of people who are Latinx, they've been profiled as well. And now we are being profiled because of this virus. So it's understanding how all these different groups of people have been profiled and attacked, that our histories have been connected, and that our futures will be connected. I think that's been another positive thing, where other groups of people have come together to support us, and saying like, what this country is doing in terms of hate crimes is terrible. That gives me hope that moving forward, less and less of that hate and hate crime will exist, and more of coming together and solidarity will exist. So yeah, moving forward, once this pandemic's over and once this hate crime wave slows down, I do hope Asian Americans remember when other groups of people have come to our defense during this time, so that we can do something in return. Yeah.
So have you or any of your friends felt scared to go out just because of the fact of the hate crimes?
Yeah. So personally, I have felt more aware of my surroundings. I think, especially when Houston said that we had to wear our masks in the public, which only, I think, for like Asian Americans puts a bigger target on us, because then people might assume we actually have the virus. So I have questioned going out sometimes to even get groceries, because I'm not sure. I really don't know what's going to happen out there. I've had a few friends who've gotten into like small altercations where people have like like pulled like their kids away from being too close to them because they're afraid that they might have the disease or something, or they called them out saying like, why are you outside? Like, you're Asian, you obviously have the disease. Terrible. I've actually had to tell my own parents to be careful too when they go out, because they still live in Louisiana, and they're by themselves. I'm not sure what's going to happen there, and I can't be there to help. And they're older, and I know a lot of the victims of hate crime are usually older, and who are more vulnerable to these attacks. So yeah, personally, I think I've dealt with that too.
If anything, have the coronavirus inspire you to do something more than you previously wouldn't have? Like, if you, in your daily life, have you been doing anything more than before?
Oh yes, I've been cooking more, so that's a really good positive. Before I'm guilty of not cooking as much, but now I obviously have to cook more, which is good because cooking is actually very therapeutic, and also just experimenting is fun. Not saying that the food is good, but that I'm trying to make it good. Baking, I think baking has also been something I've been trying to do more. Reading books. I have been reading more books before the pandemic, but now there's even more time to read books. So it's nice to read that. Learning, I guess trying to learn new skills. Right now I'm trying to learn Spanish. So again, more time to do that. And also, I guess just really being appreciative of what I have. Like when I go outside for, let's say, if I run or I walk, because I've been inside my home for forever, it's really nice to just take it in and appreciate like what I have right now. So that's been good. I'm trying to think what else I've been doing more. That's about it so far.
Cool. And what have you seen that's more prevalent in the inequalities of our societies in this pandemic?
I think I mentioned how like our systems have never been really designed to help our people, especially like during a crisis. So I think one way to sum that up is that we depend on certain people like during these really bad times, but we never reward them for their work. I think that has been the biggest theme of inequality because of this pandemic. These people, again, they're risking their lives to work at grocery stores, medical professionals, first-line responders, public transit, restaurants, and they are exposing themselves to the virus. They may be at risk to be fired or furloughed if like their company loses money, and then they don't have enough to get food to pay their rent. So you see this trickle, you see this not trickle, but you see this like wave effect of how like this one virus has just caused all these issues for our most vulnerable, and realizing that our systems are not good enough to help with these people. They have never been, but I think this virus is only just putting a huge spotlight on that. Similar to how the virus itself, because of these situations, are affecting, Black and brown communities even more. More folks from those communities are being exposed to the virus. And it's almost like this feedback loop of they don't have a choice, so they have to go out, and then they get exposed, but then they don't have the resources to help, get better. and it just it doesn't end well. Like it does not end well because of that. And this, I think, uh, Dr. Fauci mentioned that during one of uh, uh, his speeches, and that was very true when he worked, with the AIDS epidemic back in the 1970s. Um, he also mentioned that like these viruses really just put a spotlight on the already existing inequalities that we face today. So and it's shown true again today for COVID.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's the end of all the COVID-19 special collection questions. Moving on to, I guess, more like future prospects. What kind of advice do you have for younger people interested in advocacy or bringing, bridging the culture and the nation gaps?
I don't have anything too inspirational to say, but I think the one thing that I have learned myself is, if you're somebody who is younger who wants to do something to change the world for the better, pick maybe one or two things and focus on that. We have so many issues going on in this world; it's overwhelming, and you probably want to fix everything by tomorrow, but know that you can't. So I would say, focus your time on one or two things and really make those projects, issues, whatever you want to call them, your focus, because then you'll actually, I think, see those things improve because of the work you focus on with that. That was one thing that I had an issue with when I first started doing more advocacy in Houston. I was looking at everything all the time and thinking like, how can we fix everything? It wasn't really like until like last year where I realized I can't do everything. No one can. And I think that's the other big thing is like, it's not supposed to be fixed by one person. Wow. It's supposed to be fixed by multiple people. So when you realize that you want to focus on one or two things, find other people who also want to fix those one or two things and join forces with them. Not only will you have a better product at the end of the day or better result, you also don't have to do as much. And I think a lot of people, especially when they're younger, they feel like they can carry the world on their back. They can do everything. But remember, you don't. First of all, you can't. And second of all, you don't have to. You also should be able to live your life and enjoy things too in the time being. Because I think we all have passions outside of advocacy if we have any. And it's also, to me, it is also, advocacy in a sense for somebody to just live their life to the fullest. Whether it's like hanging out with friends, resting, having a party, going camping, whatever. That is also advocacy in a sense, because for a lot of us, we have this pressure of just trying to do everything, and that is our mindset. But if you can enjoy sometimes for yourself, also take advantage of that as well. Right. So yeah, those are the things that I would have young people think of.
Cool. I guess I just want to go back a little bit. When you were talking about your upbringing in Catholic school being predominantly white classmates, and you were like one of the only Asian students there, like grew up and you weren't even aware of that part of your identity, and going from that to Asian advocacy, like what was the kind of triggering moment? Can you describe more about that?
Like triggering moment in terms of like when that happened, or how I felt when that happened?
Yeah, how that happened. Like what any incident that specifically triggered that moment of reflection?
Well, yeah, I think that really happened. That happened in college. Again, when I was exposed to the Asian American Student Association. It really was my friends who were a little bit more who are either older than me or have way more experience of understanding this like Asian American history, that they told me stories. They told me like what has happened to our people before, and that was just like an aha moment. I was like, wow, I definitely did not know that, but now it makes sense. Because I was living in my bubble before, whether it was like, yeah, Catholic school, like you said, or even high school when I got exposed to more Asian Americans, they didn't really care about these things. It wasn't until college where I met people who cared and had the time to talk to me about these kind of things. I was like, okay, I didn't know that before. Now I do. I want to help, and how can I help in the best way? Um, so yeah, to me, it was my friends in college who helped me find that.
Cool. Wow. And can you share like a favorite piece of childhood memory?
Oh, favorite piece of childhood memory. Oh, okay. Wow. I think okay. Yeah, I found one. So when I lived in New Orleans, we lived really close to the levees, and I had my bicycle where I would love to just ride around my neighborhood, and I would like ride up to the top of the levee and then like go really fast going down. Um, I think just being able to have fun like with my bicycle or other thing. I had like a scooter too or rollerblades, but just enjoying life as a kid, um, being around like the waters, the hills, and the streets. That was really relaxing to me. Like after school, I would just do that for a couple of hours and be exhausted. But it was fun. It was a way for me to relax, and I think that's something that I still remember to this day. Because I grew up as a single child for the majority of or up until I was 13. So I had to entertain myself, and that was one way to have fun by myself with nobody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's horrible. So back in, I believe, 2016/17, we had the Nixon in China from the Houston Grand Opera, and there was a big uproar and different debates on both sides. Could you please share some perspectives of yours on that?
Yeah. So the Houston Grand Opera had the Nixon in China play, and it was reported from the Houston Chronicle that they had no Asian actors or actresses in the play, that they had cultural attire that were inaccurate and also racist. So that alarmed a lot of us in the community that the opera was doing this. So we met with them to talk about the issues with their actions, and they were willing to listen. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was hosting this panel with Asia Society to talk about whitewashing in general and how it's a problem, but also how we can try and fix it. So I was on the panel with one of the directors from Houston Grand Opera, an opera singer himself, and then I forgot her name, and you mentioned her name of
We'll find out.
yeah, we'll find out. Anyways, so there was a panel about that, and we talked about how for the most part, there aren't as many opportunities presented to non-white folks to join opera. I think, for their part, the opera just, they have casting calls and they just assume that whoever gets calls in will get it. Whoever sees it will try and interview, but without as much intention to say like, hey, we have this play and it's about like non-white people, we should probably prioritize finding non-white people for these roles to be accurate, especially now that it's 2016 at that time and we have the resources to do this. So that was the fruitful conversation that we had that led to Houston Grand Opera to create this cultural advisory committee, the first time they've ever done this before. And I was on that along with like 10 to 12 other folks in the community, just to, I think every month or so, or every quarter, talk with Houston Grand Opera about, well, number one, they would present like, hey, in the next year or half year, we're about to show these plays. And this is what we're trying to do to make sure that they're culturally relevant or they're culturally accurate. Is this good enough? Or what can we do to improve? So it's conversations with them about, they need to, number one, like go into, let's say, the minority communities more and do outreach, right? Have maybe small productions there, which I think they were already doing with HBO Go, where they bring, or HGO Go, where they bring their small casts to different parts of town, usually at schools, and showcase that. But to do that more, right? Just to do that more and have more chances for these people who don't have like the money or the resources to participate, because it costs money to go into these little programs. So we were thinking of doing like scholarships with them. We were thinking of translating their flyers in language, all these ways to make sure that it's accessible to people to join HGO. Not saying that like that would increase the number of people trying, but at least there's no barriers anymore. And that was the biggest thing. We can't fault, HGO to not get enough people if our communities don't want to go into it. But we can fault HGO if they don't lower all their barriers. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, is like, if you don't have any barriers, then I'm not going to have as big of an issue anymore. But you do have existing barriers that you can lower. And I think that was one of the big things. The other thing that came out of the conversations was looking at how a lot of their plays that they recycle are from an older generation and has very bad messages. So Madame Butterfly, I think, is one good example, where it was from the early 1900s. And it's a classic play, and HBO has it in their cycle. But it has a lot of pretty terrible, I guess, themes, given where we are today in society. And they asked, like, would it be better to just like cut those things out, or not even have the play at all, or what, right? And there's this conversation of like, well, you got to keep it as is because it's a classic. And then the other argument is like, but it's not to what we need today in modern society, because those things are looked down upon. Some of those things are looked down upon, whether it's like hypersexualization or fetishization or racism. Like those things we don't accept anymore in society, and we need to, and I think I lean more towards that side, where like we should evolve with the times, and the content that we show should probably change for that as well. So if you want to play Madame Butterfly or something like that, it would be nice to maybe have a remix of it, so that it's more updated to what is acceptable today. And yeah, so that's still an ongoing conversation. I'm not part of that anymore, but I hope like the opera and the industry realizes that and makes those changes, because if you keep showing that kind of stuff to the public, in some people's minds, they're going to assume like that is normal and that is acceptable. And that to me perpetuates perception, which is and that's a huge thing that media or like arts does, is it shapes perception. And if you have content that shows bad character or bad behavior, people will think that I could do that too, and then possibly cause like real pain and damage in the real world because of that. And that's something that I'm hoping we can minimize.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I didn't lay out the ground for you, but can you share some of the specific points you find that was not appropriate in the opera?
So for Nixon in China, the specific ones were again all the Asian characters were not Asian.
Right.
Um, they were wearing coolie hats,
Mm-hmm.
which is it's accurate in terms of that it was worn, but it was not worn, I don't believe, in that time period. Slash, it's overused in the play,
Mm-hmm.
and that is also a racist depiction of what like Chinese people look like back then, with the hats, the ponytail, and also like the mustache. I think there was a hypersexualization scene with like a Chinese woman, which also caused some issues too. So those were the things that were pointed out in the Houston Chronicle, and that led us to say like, whoa, okay, we should probably fix some of these things.
I see. Well, thank you for sharing your perspectives on that.
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's out of my questions. Do you have anything else to add?
No, just another thank you for this opportunity. It was nice to go down memory lane with all these questions, and they're really good questions that made me think about like what I've gone through and kind of like how that shaped who I am today. I always tell like people like you can't really tell somebody who you are without telling your whole history, because that's who you are today is based upon what you've gone through in your life. So it was nice to do that again.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for